Knights charging in perfect formation at full gallop, lances leveled, crashing through enemy lines like divine judgment. Hollywood's version of cavalry charges is pure theatre. Beautiful, dramatic, and completely wrong. Real knights broke enemy lines through calculated violence, psychological warfare, and physics that turned horses and armoured men into guided missiles that infantry couldn't stop. The actual mechanics were more brutal and more sophisticated than any movie shows. Knights didn't just charge, they executed precision maneuvers developed over centuries to exploit specific vulnerabilities in infantry formations. Once you understand how cavalry charges actually worked, every film battle becomes laughable simplification. Stand with a cavalry formation preparing to charge and you'd see everything that happens before the dramatic moment. The positioning phase was critical. Knights spent sometimes hours maneuvering for proper position, while infantry watched and waited, psychological pressure building. You'd watch knights forming up at distance, typically 200 to 400 yards from enemy lines. The formation was tight, but not the perfect line Hollywood shows. Knights arranged themselves in loose ranks with space between horses because packed formations couldn't maintain speed over distance. The front rank would be most heavily armoured knights on best horses, the shock troops designed to survive initial impact. The psychological warfare started immediately. You'd see knights displaying their armour, banners and weapons, creating visual spectacle designed to terrify waiting infantry. The sight of dozens or hundreds of armoured cavalry preparing to charge created dread that often broke enemy formations before actual contact. The ground evaluation was critical. You'd watch knights and commanders assessing terrain carefully. Muddy grounds slowed charges and made them ineffective. Uneven terrain broke formations. Obstacles, ditches, stakes, hedges could stop charges completely. Knights needed relatively flat, firm ground or the charge would fail catastrophically. The timing coordination happened through signals, horns, flags, shouted commands. You'd see the tension building as knights checked equipment, tightened straps, positioned lances. Horses would sense the energy, becoming agitated. The wait was deliberate, letting fear work on the enemy while knights prepared physically and psychologically. The charge's success was determined before it began, through positioning, terrain selection, and psychological pressure that weakened enemy resolve. Stand in an infantry formation watching the charge begin and you'd hear it before you saw the impact. Thunder of hooves, ground vibrating. The sound alone was terrifying and designed to be psychological warfare through acoustics. The physics were devastating. You'd see a warhorse weighing 1,200 to 1,500 pounds moving at 20 to 25 miles per hour. Add an armoured knight at 200 pounds plus 50 to 60 pounds of armour. Total mass of nearly a ton moving at speed. The kinetic energy was enormous, roughly equivalent to being hit by a modern car. The lance was a force multiplier. You'd watch a 12-foot wooden shaft tipped with steel, focusing all that kinetic energy into a point a few inches wide. The impact pressure was measured in tons per square inch. Lance strikes didn't wound infantry, they destroyed them. Bodies were lifted off their feet, thrown backward, often killed instantly from the trauma. The speed wasn't actually full gallop. You'd see knights accelerate to controlled fast canter or gallop, roughly 15 to 20 miles per hour at impact. Faster meant loss of formation control. Slower meant less impact force. The optimal speed was learned through experience and training. Movies show wild full-speed charges, but real knights balance speed with control. The impact moment was chaos. You'd hear the crash of lances hitting shields and bodies, screaming from men and horses. The sound of breaking wood as lances shattered. Knights would drop broken lances and draw swords or maces for continued melee. Horses would plow into infantry lines using their mass to create gaps. The momentum was everything. You'd watch successful charges literally push through infantry formations, not going around obstacles but crushing straight through them. The horses didn't avoid humans in their path. They ran them down. The psychological shock of being trampled combined with physical impact created panic that spread through defensive lines. Night charges broke lines through physics, precision and timing, not through dramatic heroics but through calculated application of massive kinetic energy. Stand in the infantry shield wall as cavalry charges and you'd understand why formations broke before physical contact. The psychological pressure was unbearable, watching death thunder toward you while unable to run or fight back effectively. You'd hear your comrades' breathing accelerate, see men shifting weight nervously, feel the collective tension as everyone calculated their odds of survival. The infantry's best defense was maintaining formation, but maintaining formation required nerves most men didn't have when facing mounted charge. The first ranks had it worst. You'd watch cavalry coming directly at you, knowing you'd take the initial impact. The men behind you prevented retreat. The men beside you needed you to hold position or the line would collapse. The pressure was psychological torture designed into cavalry tactics. The breaking point was predictable. You'd see one man step back, then another. The formation would waver. Once it started, panic spread exponentially. Within seconds, disciplined troops became fleeing mobs. The charge hadn't touched them yet. Their own fear had broken the line. This was the tactical genius of cavalry charges. You'd watch knights exploiting humanity's natural fear of being trampled. Infantry who held formation had a fighting chance. Shields could deflect lances, pikes could impale horses. But holding formation against charging cavalry required courage most soldiers didn't possess. The commanders knew this. You'd see them positioning the most reliable troops in front, veterans who'd faced cavalry before and survived. Putting green troops in first rank guaranteed collapse. But even veterans felt the fear. They just had training to control it while new soldiers broke and ran. Cavalry charges broke enemy psychology before breaking enemy bodies, and knights designed every element to maximize terror. Stand with cavalry units and you'd see that the charge wasn't a single tactic, but a family of related maneuvers adapted to specific situations. Knights understood that charging directly into prepared pike walls was suicide. They developed alternatives. The feigned retreat was sophisticated psychological manipulation. You'd watch cavalry charge, engage briefly, then retreat in apparent panic. Infantry, thinking they'd won, would break formation to pursue. Then the cavalry would wheel and charge again, now against disordered enemies who couldn't reform quickly enough. The tactic required discipline to retreat convincingly without actually panicking. The flanking charge was standard response to a strong centre. You'd see cavalry refusing to engage pike walls head-on, instead manoeuvring to hit infantry from sides or rear where they were vulnerable. Infantry formations were designed for frontal defence. Attacks from other directions caused immediate collapse. The caracole emerged later with pistol-equipped cavalry. You'd watch riders approaching at distance, firing pistols into infantry formations, then wheeling away before counterattack. This wasn't breaking lines traditionally, but harassing them until gaps appeared. Less dramatic than lance charge, but often more effective against prepared defences. The hammer and anvil required coordination. You'd see heavy cavalry charge while infantry, the anvil, engaged enemies from the front. The cavalry struck from rear or flank, crushing enemies between two forces. This required communication and timing, but was devastatingly effective when executed properly. The pursuit charge happened after battle lines broke. You'd watch cavalry transform from precision formation to hunting pack, running down fleeing infantry. This phase caused most cavalry combat casualties. Enemies couldn't defend while running. The lances came down again, this time striking exposed backs. Pursuit could turn enemy defeat into total annihilation. Knights adapted charges to tactical situations. Not one technique, but a sophisticated family of maneuvers optimized for specific scenarios. Stand in the impact zone and you'd see what Hollywood never shows: the grotesque physics of horses and lances hitting human bodies at speed. The lance strikes were immediately catastrophic. You'd watch lance points punching through shields, mail, sometimes even plate armor. The force was sufficient to penetrate and continue into the body behind. Men were lifted off their feet and thrown backward as lances broke or were torn from knights' hands. The horses themselves were weapons. You'd see 1,500 pounds of animal hitting infantry lines, knocking men down, trampling them. War horses were trained to strike with hooves, bite with teeth. They weren't passive vehicles, they were aggressive participants in combat. The combination of rider attacking from above and horse attacking at ground level was overwhelming. The sound was nightmarish. You'd hear bones breaking, ribs crushed by horse impact, limbs shattered by lance strikes, screaming from wounded men and animals, the crash of weapons on armor and shields, the wet sounds of steel in flesh. Combat veterans said cavalry charges sounded like storms, overwhelming assault on the senses. The aftermath in the impact zone was carnage. You'd see bodies thrown in unnatural positions, broken by force of impact rather than cutting wounds, lances embedded in corpses, horses with pike wounds bleeding and panicking, knights who'd survived impact engaging in close combat with infantry who'd held formation. The romantic image of chivalric combat dissolved into brutal melee. The horses took casualties too. You'd watch war horses impaled on pikes going down and throwing riders, horses with hamstrung tendons collapsing. The animals screamed when wounded, high-pitched neighing that added to battlefield chaos. Knights whose horses were killed often died quickly, surrounded by infantry who saw armoured knights on foot as priority targets. The successful charge created a gap in enemy formation. You'd see knights pushing through, widening the breach, allowing following ranks to exploit the opening. Once broken, infantry formations were nearly impossible to reform under continued attack. The breakthrough became a rout, then massacre. Impact zones were charnel houses where physics met flesh, and Hollywood's clean charges missed the catastrophic violence of reality. Stand with infantry who successfully stopped cavalry charges, and you'd see it required preparation, discipline, and specific counter-tactics developed over centuries of warfare. The pike wall was the cavalry's greatest enemy. You'd watch infantry present a forest of 12 to 18-foot pikes, points angled to impale charging horses. Horses weren't suicidal. They'd try to avoid impalement, breaking their own charge. Successful pike walls could stop cavalry completely without striking a blow. The psychological impact worked both directions. The terrain preparation made charges impossible. You'd see defensive armies deploying stakes, digging ditches, positioning on slopes or marshy ground where cavalry couldn't charge effectively. Knights on poor terrain lost their primary advantage: momentum and speed. The archer harassment disrupted charges before they formed. You'd watch longbowmen or crossbowmen targeting horses at range. Wounded horses threw riders or refused to charge. Disrupting formation coherence meant knights hit enemy lines in scattered groups rather than unified front, far less effective. The disciplined square formation was classic counter-cavalry defense. You'd see infantry forming hollow squares with pikes or spears pointing outward on all sides. Cavalry couldn't flank or rear attack. Every approach faced pointed weapons. The formation could rotate to countercharges from any direction. Breaking squares required either artillery or the infantry's own panic, both rare in competent forces. The English longbowmen at Agincourt demonstrated combination defensive tactics. You'd watch them use stakes to create barriers, occupy muddy ground where cavalry couldn't charge, and shower approaching knights with arrows. The French cavalry charges failed catastrophically. Knights bogged in mud, horses impaled on stakes, riders shot before reaching lines. Hundreds of France's best knights died in futile charges against prepared positions. Cavalry charges broke lines only when conditions favoured them. Terrain, enemy discipline, and tactical situation had to align, or the charge became suicide mission. Movies show glorious charges that always succeed through dramatic momentum. Real cavalry charges were calculated gambles that succeeded only when preparation, terrain, and enemy psychology aligned favourably. Failed charges meant catastrophic casualties and often battle defeat. Hollywood shows knights charging in perfect lines at full gallop. Real cavalry maintained loose formation at controlled speeds. Too tight meant horses colliding with each other. Too fast meant loss of control and formation coherence. The precision came from training, not from dramatic staging. Films ignore the psychological dimension entirely. Real charges won primarily by breaking enemy nerves before physical contact. The most successful charges were those where the enemy fled before impact. The violence was secondary to the terror. Hollywood misses that the scariest cavalry charges were the ones that never actually had to hit anything. Movies show charges as a single dramatic moment. Real cavalry operations were complex, multi-phase processes: positioning, intimidation, charge, impact, melee, pursuit. Each phase had specific tactics and techniques. The charge itself was the shortest part of the entire operation. Hollywood makes charges seem universally effective. Real knights knew charges were situational tactics that failed catastrophically against prepared defenses. Agincourt, Bannockburn, and other battles demonstrated that cavalry charges against disciplined infantry in good positions meant dead knights and captured nobility. The physics Hollywood shows are wrong. Real lance impacts at cavalry charge speeds didn't wound infantry. They destroyed them completely. The kinetic energy involved was catastrophic. Modern people don't understand the force involved when a ton of armoured horses and knights hits a human body at 20 miles per hour. The result wasn't movie-style combat. It was instant trauma incompatible with survival. Knights broke enemy lines through calculated violence, psychological warfare, and physics. Not through dramatic courage or noble charges, but through brutal application of force at precise moments against psychologically broken enemies.